All right, so here we are. Thank you for coming. My name is Clark Henry. I'm on the board of directors of CFEDC. And late last year, our last session, so this is our first event of 2019. And our final event last year was we organized people to find out what they wanted to hear and the topics that they wanted us to discuss. And hearing local leaders talk about their recent visits to different cities and experiences and seeing what other places are doing and transferable things here was floated high on the list. So we listened to you and others and your friends out there, and here we are. And Chair Barfield was gracious enough to join us tonight and describe his recent visits to Greenville and Charleston. So without further ado, I'll hand you the stage. If you want to sit, stand, whatever you want to do. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I think I'm amongst family and friends number 2. And I can look forward to sharing with you just what I've learned over the last several years, having gone to Richmond, Virginia, Charleston, South Carolina, and Greenville, South Carolina. You know, I sell real estate, and there are times that I go into these massive homes that are so saying the wrong word, it's so elaborate and beautiful. And then I go back home and look at my house and think, man, I have to live here. This house I was just in was so nice, it's $1 million+ home, and I got to live here. And then I realized that my home is really nice. It's just all relative to where you are in your situation. So as we go to other cities and you look at all the great things that they're doing, and you compare what you're doing in your community to what they're doing, you realize that at the end of the day, it's all pretty relevant to what's happening in your own backyard. The first trip that I went on was down to Charleston, South Carolina. It was really a great trip. And Charleston is really a booming city. They have the Carnival cruise ship that docks down there. Great historic area as well, just like we have here. Great water access to the ocean. Great shipping industry there as well in terms of the state port right there in Charleston. A lot of visitors come. As a matter of fact, Charleston is the #1 tourist destination in the whole United States of America. If you can believe that, they're the #1 tourist destination in all of the U.S. Out of all the cities that we have in our state, in our country, all the great places you can go, Charleston is the #1 tourist destination in the country. And I find that those things don't happen by happenstance. Folks are very intentional about who they want to come, how they want to market their community, how much money they're going to spend in marketing their community to get people to come in as well, but also very intentional on companies that they want to come and set up home in their cities. The same thing with Richmond, Virginia, the same thing with Greenville, South Carolina. And I want to start with Charleston first. That was the first trip that I went on. And we brought in a lot of the economic development people in their community. The chamber president definitely led the way. Their mayor, pro tem, came and spoke to our group. And in Charleston, they have a strong mayor form of government, which means that pretty much the mayor runs the city. In North Carolina, we have a weak mayor form of government, where the city manager, the county manager, runs the day-to-day operation of the city, and the city council and mayors set policies. So it's a different form of governance where the mayor there was very involved in the transformation of Charleston and recruiting companies to come to their community as well. But they bought the Boeing facility in, and they built a facility there, a plant there, and employing over 8,500 people in their community. And at that time, Volvo was looking at coming to Charleston as well and bringing more jobs to their community. And the biggest challenge they found, and they find themselves in today in Charleston, is the lack of affordable housing. The lack of affordable housing. There are so many people that are working at this Boeing facility, but they can't afford to buy a home in Charleston proper. I'm a friend with a realtor on Facebook, and I got an email or a message on Facebook the other day. He's got a home on the market, beautiful home in downtown Charleston, 2,400 square feet, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, 3.5 bath. The home is almost $900,000. That's probably not to be affordable to that person that's working at that Boeing plant making airplanes. However, it may be affordable to someone that's retired or has some considerable, disposable income that they can use to indeed live just like that. And we're finding that the same phenomenon is happening in our community as well, with folks that really can't afford to find a home in our community for what their wages will indeed allow them to have. Our trip to Greenville, the one thing that I heard from them over and over and over again was they've been very intentional about their growth, but they also had a vision of what they want their city to look like. And so I think about our community, and the city has their plans, the county has some plans, Rice Beach has some visions, Carolina Beach has some visions, Curie Beach has visions, but none of those visions has really come together. We all sat down at the table and said collectively, this is what we want New Hampshire County to look like. Because no matter where you live, whether you're in Rifle Beach or Carolina Beach or Curie Beach or the unincorporated parts of the county, you're still in New Hampshire County. And so my goal is that we convene all these groups to come together, along with our Tourism Development Authority individuals, as well as our economic development partners, and really talk about what do we envision this great place to look like. There are 100 counties in the state of North Carolina. Of that 100 counties, there are 15 that are urban. We are that urban county in southeastern North Carolina. And we're pretty much what I would call the economic hub of southeastern North Carolina, as well, and the leaders in regards to economic development, those kind of things in our region as well. So in my opinion, we need to sit down as a group and really think about what do we want our city to look like? What do we want our county to look like? And then step it out to the counties that surround us, Penn and Russell County, and kind of map out plans with them as well in terms of how we want our region to look down the road. What industries do we want to recruit to our community, and how do we want to grow those bases here? You know, having been a long-time resident here, I got to Wilmington when I was a year old. My dad's from here. He lived on Rifle Sound across where the gallery used to be. I tell folks I got here as quick as I could. My mom worked at the Corning plant. My dad worked at GE. And as you all know, some may know, my dad served on the Board of County Commissioners himself from 1980 to 92. So he tells me the story of the Committee of 100, which is now WBD. And at that time, GE was looking at coming to our community. And the only plant that we had here was Babcock and Wilcox. And so the Committee of 100 told GE, you can come to this community, but you can't pay the wages that you're paying across the country, because this one plant here can't afford to compete with those wages, and you'll drive them out of business. And so GE agreed to come and pay low wages, build their facility, and then once they hired folks, they immediately started giving people raises. And they got them up to their national average across the country. Then a few years later, Corning came in. I think DuPont was in the process of setting up shop over in Brunswick County as well. So those were the key industries that were happening in New Hampshire County when I was growing up. The rail industry had long, gone to the wayside. And Corning back then, my mom, I saw one of her pay stubs. I think she was making $2.25 an hour back then. So that was a long time ago, as you can quite imagine. But I know that our economic development leaders had a vision for our community then, but they were trying to figure out how do we keep the local companies employed while we bring other industries in. Once I-40 opened up, it really brought so much more growth to our community as well. And they're seeing some of the same phenomenon in Greenville, South Carolina, although it's kind of hard to get to. I was looking at a publication the other day showing the 10 best cities to live from a younger person's perspective, and Greenville, South Carolina was on that list of one of the 10 best cities to live in. As they're expanding and growing, they've got a very big focus on high tech. We have our CEI, or CIE at UNCW. They've got something very similar, but it's much more robust there. It's a really great think tank, and it's privately funded, unlike ours with the university, it's privately funded, with the city of Greenville actually investing a good bit of money into it as well, but really trying to grow that think tank cluster, those economic development, those entrepreneur, those high-tech kind of individuals to their community to branch off and bring more of those types of jobs into Greenville. And as those jobs come in, you find more wealth coming in as well, and a different crop of people coming in to Greenville as well. But again, they're also facing a shortage of affordable housing, as they've seen their rents and property values in downtown Greenville pretty much skyrocket as a result of. We had a great walking tour in Greenville and looking at all the new development that's taking place downtown Greenville. It is a very beautiful town. They had a hotel almost like the Cape Fear Apartments here, called the Francis Marion Hotel, that was converted by Marriott. And this is a phenomenal property right there in downtown Greenville, along with all the other shops that are taking place there as well. But they have been focused on what they wanted this city to look like 20, 30, 40 years ago, to the point where they were actually acquiring properties that would be along the corridor where they wanted to be, so they could actually tear some things down to reshape the vision, put in the right paths in their community as well, to indeed make it more visible. There's a beautiful pedestrian bridge right downtown Greenville, and apparently that used to be a vehicular bridge. And what maybe people didn't realize is that there was a beautiful waterfall at the base of that bridge, and no one ever saw it driving their cars across. And so now, as they've taken out the vehicular bridge and putting the pedestrian bridge up, you hear the waterfall, you see the waterfall, and folks gather around that area all the time. And it's become their thing. It's the one thing that people think about when they think about Greenville. They think about the waterfall. So I left there, my thought was, what is our thing? You know, there's so many things that we have here that could be your thing, so to speak, your signature piece, what people will always look at you for. What is our thing here in Jonathan County, and what can we focus on to really bring people to come and see our thing? What is that thing? Is it the battleship? Is it the Riverwalk? Is it historic downtown Wilmington? Is it the 3 beaches that we have? Is it Mayfair? What is that thing? Definitely not Mayfair. And, you know, we have so many things, but we can focus on 1, 2, or 3 things and really make those the focal points of our community. I think we can bring more people in, number one, tourists, number one, but also folks that may want to come here and make this place their home as well. Because my question is, how does a city like Greenville, or how a city like Charleston, get a company like Boeing to come in and build a facility, a company like Volvo to come in and build a plant? It starts number one with their state government. Their state government gives outrageous incentives. They have told the entire world that South Carolina is open for business, and they give tremendous incentives. From the taxing standpoint at the local level, they're giving their local governments more flexibility to have different types of taxes. So they don't want to have a large corporate tax on the state end, but they will offer great incentives. They'll give the local governments the ability to tax for roads, or tax for school construction, or tax for this, or tax for that. And it puts the burden on those local elected officials to go out and raise taxes and be the bad guy, as opposed to the folks that are serving in their state capital. But they're giving tremendous incentives to companies to come to their state and set up shop. And to me, I believe in doing incentives. And to me, it's really just a rebate. You know, my wife, she wears some of the nicest clothes, she shops at Belk, she shops at Dillard's, and she looks really good all the time. But she knows what the clearance rack is, number one. She also takes her coupons at number 2 and finds those deals. When the paper comes out, she knows what the deals are. And all she does is hand them that coupon, and instead of paying full price, she's going to get a rebate back on what that full price sticker was. She's happy, Belk is happy, they sold their product, they're bringing money in, the wife is happy, she's got the product in her hand, and everyone can walk away a winner. And that's how we're going to win here in our community as well, making sure we have the right incentive packages to lure companies into our community to let them stay here long term. You figure National Gypsum that just came back to our community, the small amount of money that the county and city invested in their corporation, they're bringing in 50 jobs, paying individuals in excess of $50,000 a year. You not only have the tax roll, what the county's going to tax them for their business property, now you have these incomes that are coming in that are also going to be taxed on the state and federal level, but also those folks are coming in and buying homes in our community now. They're shopping at restaurants, and they're going to the grocery store, they're buying cars in the community, they're buying clothes in the community. So they're taking those resources and investing them over and over and over again, which makes our economy and Jonathan County continue to grow and prosper beyond what the counties indeed invested in terms of an incentive or rebate going back to that particular company. So the more of those kind of things that we can do, I think the better. It's a matter of putting the right mix together and having companies who are looking to come to our community. I've been fortunate, having worked with Scott Satterfield and WBD for a number of years, as companies have come to our community looking at our town versus several other communities across the country and trying to figure out who has the best resources for them. People capital, land, infrastructure, all those things. And they're shopping our community with other communities as well. Typically, WBD will sign a non-disclosure agreement where I'm sitting at the table with folks, you don't know what company they're with, you know what industry cluster that they're part of, but you know who they are and what company they're with, as they want to keep all that secret until they decide where they're going to go. And one time I was at a table with some folks that were from, I think they were Chinese or Japanese, had translators there speaking. It was just the neatest conversation that we had about what they were trying to do here. That company never did come to our community, but others have indeed come here. And again, our goal is to figure out how do we show them all the great things that our county has to offer. What do y'all think is one of our greatest assets here from a business standpoint? It's right down the street from here.
Spoke, PPD.
No?
K-4 Community College?
K-4 Community College. They are always at the table. Whenever a company comes to our community looking at setting up shop, K-4 Community College is always at the table. The state provides great grants for companies that want to have their employees trained, where the state will actually pay K-4 Community College the cost to actually train the individuals for a particular industry cluster to come here. So it's a great partnership between the state, community college, and companies that want to train their workforce here as well. So when Verizon came here, they had a great training program. When GE hired several additional people a couple of years ago to expand their nuclear facility, they partnered with K-4 Community College as well to train their employees to get them up in the workforce. And now I see the GE is hiring machinists at a rate of $23 or something an hour as well. So they're trying to grow their business even more. But K-4 Community College is one of our great assets in our community. They're located right downtown as well as on North Campus off of Blue Clay Road. But again, going back to Greenville and just looking at what they were doing there, the one word that we heard, and I said it before, was that we're intentional about what we want to have happen here. We're intentional about the growth we want to see here. We have a vision and a plan, and we're intentional, we're intentional, we're intentional. And that word was a word we heard over and over and over again. No matter who spoke to us and what place that we went to, we kept hearing the word intentional. And so for me, I believe that we need to be more intentional about what we want to have happen here in our community as well, and make sure we stay focused on that.
How do we make that happen? How do we take all of the many economic development organizations in this town and get the leadership that says, we're going to pull together all these people with these great ideas, and we're going to come up with a plan that has community input? How do we make that happen?
You know, it's great to see the partnership that's taking place between the Wilmington Chamber and Wilmington Business Development. Now the English and Scott Satterfield have started to create synergy and build relationship amongst themselves. But they're not the only ones. You got Wilmington Downtown Incorporated, that should be a part of that conversation as well. You have the home builders that should be a part of that conversation. The realtor family should be a part of that conversation. Another group as well coming to the table with your local governments. And again, my goal is really to figure out how we convene that meeting and start the conversation with a focus on what we need to focus on, which is coming up with a vision. And it starts with a vision. This book I like to read says that where there's no vision, the people perish. And where there's no vision, you can go a whole lot of different places. Or when you have a vision, you can stay focused on that one thing and not get deterred by the latest and greatest thing that may pop up down the road, but really stay focused on where you want your community to go, and recognize that in 30 years from now, when you're much older, you can look back and say, you know, I played a part in this, and now we have really grown into this great metropolis on the East Coast. But it started with his vision and his visioning document that a group of folks sat down and wrote 30 years ago, and now we're starting to see it happen. And just like with road projects, I mean, look at the I-140 bypass, and that was talked about 30 years ago. And now to see it finally come to fruition, I mean, it takes a long time for those things to happen, and I think this vision for our community is going to take a while to happen as well.
One of our leading corporate companies that I won't mention has 3 different groups. They have a 5-year R&D, a 10-year R&D, and a 20-year R&D, all going at the same time and working with each other so that what they're planning is integrated. And it's not a short range, but they have 3 completely different groups working together with different time frames as a vision for just what they're talking about.
That's what we need globally. Yes, sir.
What do you see? You mentioned several possibilities that you observed in Charleston, Greenville, less so I heard in terms of Richmond. You talked about incentives. Are the incentives that South Carolina is providing to bring bowling light into Charleston and some? I think one of the major car manufacturing facilities located in Greenville Parkway area. Are those coming from the state, or are they coming from the local community?
They're mainly coming from the state.
Okay.
I think
So that's
participate in it.
I'm guessing, just based on the experience that I've observed, I only lived here in the last 4 or 5 years. I'm from North Carolina, but I've lived in Wilmington that long. That the difficulty in sustaining the incentive program for the film industry is such that the state itself, at least in the political environment up to now, has not been all that favorable for incentive programs of that sort. Is that?
State legislature.
I think you
Make
guys-
sure you get it
I said
right.
state government, legislature.
Yeah,
But
legislature.
but it isn't, well, government is what I think it said. The state government has not, whether it's coming from, and we got the same issue with, you talked about there being a weak mayoral system. We have a weak gubernatorial system.
Our issue is, I mean, as far as I can see with what I've interpreted through the demise of our film industry, was that it was our legislator
Right.
out of our district,
Okay.
Mr. Rick Catlin, who said, I don't believe in incentives. And so if you are the largest element of the film industry, which of course had filming going on in 85 counties when he made that comment, it is unfair to all of us that are in any kind of industry. It affected every human being in this county when the movie industry has received such an incredible incentive package in Atlanta. And it's never going to come our way because Atlanta has an incredible air hub there of Delta worldwide. And yeah, it's wonderful to think it'll come back, and I hope it does somewhat, or anyone, but all of us. There's not an industry I can name. Every car dealership in this town lost money on this because every time they made a film in this town, they didn't bring in cars by rail from Detroit or by truck from Detroit because they had some super deal. They went out and bought from our local car dealers. And they bought brand new cars and wrecked them 5,000 times before they got 1 5-second film that they bought. But that's great because that's money spent. And it's just sort of sad, that lack of understanding the economic effect it was for the whole county.
Answer your
This
question.
question, though, is what can we do? And this ties back to, you talked about a difficulty in getting a strong vision of leadership. This is just one part of that. If you have a vision in leadership, then you can be, it wouldn't just come from Wilmington. It have to come from cities like Asheville, cities like Charlotte, which have been pretty strong in this regard, but they apparently have achieved their development in the Raleigh-Durham area also without the incentive programs, and say that some other states have. But if you could get a group that goes to Raleigh and then says, look, let's try to do this, and we are competing with South Carolina, we are competing with Virginia and Georgia, and if it's a lack of incentives is a difficulty in being able to achieve, then that's a step that Wilmington can take a lead in trying to orchestrate that approach. But the other aspect of it is the sort of the difficulty of vision. You talked about this question that over here was raised. You talked about all the different units that are here, but there's no visible, strong leadership in my impression. You talk about Charleston, about Bill Riley, who basically said, I'm going to make this city do it. And do it across a range of dimensions, not just the business and the tourism, but also across the quality of schools and the way that people get together in that city to do things in a city, let's face it, that had been very divided, for example, along racial lines. He came in and provided that leadership. I'm not aware of there being, whether it's the individual or the unit of participation here, to achieve that. And that seems to me to be a pretty strong element. He said, you don't have a vision. I think the words were, it was in perish, whatever it is, something along those lines. And that, to me, is just in my brief period here, is one of the significant weaknesses. How do we do that? What is the unit? Not the individual as a person, but who does it?
And I think that your county government can definitely lead that effort. As I'm standing here having a conversation, I know that we can. From the film industry standpoint, the County Commissioners Association has a legislative bills conference every January, every 2 years when the new elected legislators go into office. And we were able to put on our statewide legislative goals agenda, reinvigorating the film industry statewide. And as you have this conversation amongst commissioners from all across the 100 counties, and some folks have said, well, it doesn't benefit my county, why should I be involved? Why should we encourage this when it doesn't benefit my county? At the end of the day, we all came to the conclusion that we're 100 counties strong. If it's good for one county, it's good for all 100 counties. but again, it does benefit the 85 or so of the counties within our state. And so it begins there, but to me, it was politics involved and folks deciding we want to remove something, you know, or try to fix something that wasn't broken. My dad was in office when the first movie was filmed here, which was Firestarter with Drew Barrymore back in 1984. They had a big premiere that filmed at the movie theater across from UNCW that doesn't exist anymore. And I used to own a disc jockey business, you can believe that, earlier in life. And I did a lot of rap parties for the film industry. I met so many movie stars and DJed for them back in my former life. And so I know the impact that a small business can have and the resources that a small business can make based on that particular industry coming to our community. Yes, Atlanta has beefed up their stock there. I've got a neighbor that lives across the street from me that is an assistant director in the film industry that's working everywhere but Wilmington. Matter of fact, he was in Hawaii most recently, now he's in Australia working. He would love to work right here in his hometown, but it's just not happening here. Even with Stranger Things, when it was thought about coming here, they were looking for a long-term incentive deal. At that time, there was a sunset on our state incentive, so they chose to go to Atlanta. Stranger Things could have been filmed right here in our community for long-term commitment had we had folks with the vision to look down the road. But again, yes, sir.
Jonathan, I wanted to give you a chance to bring the conversation back to affordable housing because I sense that you brought that up several times throughout your opening. And I wanted to ask you two things. Can affordable housing in the form of infill development around the county, can that fulfill what your expectation or need for affordable housing is, or does it need to be localized? Is there a particular part of the county where it needs to be? And then the second question is, can you tie that in for us to growth and economic development in the community? Just articulate for us how that ties in.
We'll start with the last part first. So Castle Branch, we provided incentives for them to build a new building several years ago, bring in 400 additional employees to our community, paying somewhere in the high 30 to mid 40 range. When companies are looking at your community to set up shop, they're looking at a whole host of things. They're looking at infrastructure, they're looking at skilled workforce, but they're also looking at housing affordability for their employees. So if Castle Branch is bringing folks in making $35,000, $40,000 a year, they're trying to figure out, is there housing stock in that community that these folks will come in and either rent and or buy. And when you have a little of that, companies will move on. And we've also heard the same conversation in Greenville as well, as they have lost some companies because their housing stock was not where it needed to be for the average employer that's going to bring in a mass of folks to come in to be able to afford to live there. Again, at Boeing, you have folks driving 35, 40, 50 miles away to go to work because they can't afford to live in Charleston proper. Just like the building industry, it's just like the companies who want to recruit here, providing incentives. We need to figure out how do you incentivize developers as well to incorporate affordable housing units into their developments. We cannot require them to put affordable housing units in. There's no such thing as inclusionary zoning in North Carolina where if you want this type of zone, you've got to have X amount of affordable housing units in, maybe lower price, lower rent, lower for sale prices on those properties. You can't make developers do that, but you can find a way to incentivize that. And whether it be working with CFEDC to lower some of their fees to tap into water and sewer, whether it's the county working with our inspection department to lower some of the fees that we charge for folks to come in and get their permitting and those kind of things. Finding creative ways to make that happen. And we've talked about, we've got 15 acres off of, in the Castlevania Riceboro area that was designated as a park 20-some plus years ago that won't be utilized in that way because we've developed the Northern Regional Park that's 3 miles away from there, and it wouldn't make sense to have two parks that close together like you wouldn't have two Walgreens that close together. But being able to maybe partner with the developer, having the land costs included with the purchase of the home where the buyer's not paying for the land, and having a much lower cost to have a home built. The same phenomenon happened at Sunset South many years ago when the old Dove Meadows was off of Carolina Beach Road. Those were HUD properties. They came in and tore those down, partnered with a group called Housing Economic Opportunities, and they managed the whole project there. And when buyers came in and bought brand new homes, the land cost was free, so therefore they had a home, the land didn't cost anything, but they got the land with the home. I had a teacher, matter of fact, an assistant principal, that moved here that bought a 1,700 square foot, 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath home for like $142,000, which would have been probably 180 or better had the land price been included in there. So finding creative ways to make that happen, to me, is definitely important. You know, we're talking with a developer that's doing Project Grace about incorporating some affordable housing units in there, so the average person like me can afford to live downtown. Looking at River Place, those are 1- and 2-bedroom units starting in the 3s. So that's not going to be for the average person. And I mentioned when we had our meeting with the city on affordable housing, the county has now raised our minimum wage for employees to the minimum of $15 an hour, just over $31,000 a year. So if you're a single person making $31,000 a year, based on the housing inventory that I see in our community, there's not a decent house you can buy in New Hanover County on that salary. I'm working with a woman right now, she works at CFEDC, we're looking over in Brunswick County, and she's in the 175, 180 range. But those houses in our county, they just, they come on the market, they're gone just that quick. Yes, ma'am.
How do we, and this is part city, part county. I was on the comprehensive plan for the city of Wilmington, and we focused to having workforce housing, something that's affordable. And when we wrote the plan, we wrote it so that we could have areas that were green areas, continue to be green areas that were going to be workforce housing. What I'm seeing after coming out of that is developers are buying that because they don't have to go and spend extra money to redevelop a brownfield site, or not even a brownfield site, but an infill site. So they're tearing down the trees, and instead of putting in houses, they're either putting in $1 million houses, or they're putting in big, huge, expansive, the avenue, the whatever it is, the compass, or whatever it is on Eastwood or whatever. And we're doing, they're trying to do this also outside the county, in the county areas. How do we keep Wilmington and New Hanover County being focused to more like a Charleston, as opposed to becoming more like a Myrtle Beach? Because what I see is that these developers that are coming in, they're coming in from outside. They're coming in from Greensboro, they're coming in from Charlotte, they're coming in from Atlanta. They don't care what it does to our community after they leave. And our commissioners, both at the more so at the city level, but also at the county level, seem to be, hey, come on in, because this is taxes. This brings in new taxes, and they see it as a tax base for expansion. How do we keep it so that our area that is green, that is residential, can remain for houses that are for the $200,000, $300,000 houses, and have those people come in?
I think that's almost a physical impossibility in my opinion. You do some of that by zoning, which, you know, we just passed our 2016 comprehensive land use plan a couple years ago. Now we're going through our UDO process, and we've got a phenomenal planning director, Mr. Clark. And he's got a brain that's outside of the normal brain in terms of how you think creatively, and making sure you have the right zoning in the right places, so you don't have to go back and rezone stuff over and over and over again. So that's what he's working on now. You know, personally, I believe in private property rights. So if you own a piece of land, you should be able to do what you want to do with that land, as long as it does not hurt other people. At the same time, from the county standpoint, we are working hard with our planning staff to make sure the developers have the least impact on our environment. We try to get them to use as many low-impact development techniques as possible to have the least impact on the environment. I think the Lower Cape Fear Stewardship Program, I think, does a great job in helping to promote those low-impact development techniques to make sure that we're not impacting our rivers and our streams to a certain point. But at the end of the day, it takes a willing buyer and a willing seller who wants to sell a piece of land to develop on it. We sold my grandmother's property. My grandparents lived on Weissel Avenue, across where the gallery was. My grandma died 8 years ago. Ended up selling her house and the house next door to hers on Weissel Avenue. There are now some townhomes that are being built behind her home. I rode past her one day and the house is gone. And I sat there for a while, because this is a house that I pretty much grew up in as a kid. And looking at Rifle Sound proper, looking at the gallery was, my granddad used to play baseball over there as a kid, where Lumina Station is. My Uncle Buster owned the land where Lumina Station was. My Uncle Buster had a trash hauling business. He hauled trash to the town of Rifle Beach, had his own trucks, the whole 9 yards. Lumina Station was a landfill when I grew up here. That was Uncle Buster's landfill. And to see all that area transformed, and as I go down on Rifle Avenue now, I realize the Rifle Sound will never be the Rifle Sound that I grew up with. It will never have that appeal that it had when I was a kid. Back then, there was a Rosenwald school between my grandmother's house and the two churches right there on Wrightsville Avenue. There were the wild plum trees that you could actually go and pick wild plums that you never see in our community anymore. There were a lot of things that were here before that, as transformation takes place, will never be here again.
A follow-up question. From your learnings with Charleston and Greenville, though, did they just say, well, okay, the rights of the landowner is what rights of the landowner, or did they say, no, we have to have a vision, and we need to say, this is how we're going to envision? Because when I go to Charleston, I don't see high-rises all over. There's high-rises out on the island, whatever it's called, but when you come in, it's green. You see a beautiful greenery. You see something relaxing, and it's different. So, what did you learn from them? Did they just say, well, whatever the person has a right to their...
I guess my last trip to Charleston, which was in October, I didn't see that much greenery. I didn't walk. And I know that they've got a lot of development going on in Charleston proper. And they're continuing to grow in Charleston proper. I'm not sure what their vision was regarding what you're speaking of now. But I know that most of the land in downtown Charleston is pretty much already built upon. Where there's not much more you can do with that land other than tear something down and build something back on top of what's there. Almost like our downtown in a sense.
I just wanted to come back to your idea of the vision. I know that we started talking about it, but how can we be involved? I know you're a big believer in what WBB and the chamber are doing, which is great. We're really big believers in finding ways to be open and getting public input and getting public awareness and transparency. Yeah, certainly there are times when you can't talk about who's thinking about moving here, of course, that from a corporate perspective, that makes sense. But there are a lot of times when you can't, and a lot of newer ways to do economic development are, like, look at Amazon, look at Apple. They've made it really, really, really clear what they were interested in getting. And I think we're moving in that direction. How can we make sure as an organization that we are helping people like everybody in this room have a voice in this vision? Can it be directed by the county?
You know, just like when we did our comprehensive land use plan, we had so many community forums and community meetings where the community came in and rolled on boards and gave their ideas on what they wanted to see. And then at the end of the day, the staff incorporated all those things and they brought them back to the elected body to actually codify it and make it happen. So I think that there are definitely opportunities for the entire, and it should be a community process. As the community talks about what they want to see. But I guarantee you that the whole community at one point in time, I can get 5 people in my house to agree on what we're going to have for dinner. So it's going to spark, even with Project Grace that we're talking about right now, there's so many split opinions on that one project. And at some point it gets to a point where you got to cut off the community discussion and make a decision, because you'll never get anywhere with different groups that don't want it, I do want it, I don't want it, I do want it. At some point you've got to make a decision on what.
But do you see the shared values as you're
I do.
listening to people?
I do.
So you're seeing sort of the common denominator of what people want?
I do. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. You go to her first, since she's a lady.
I'm not sure I like that, Jonathan, but all right. I have an issue with the fact that all evening we haven't heard.
Can I switch to you, sir?
He knows I give people a hard time. I haven't heard the word clean companies and industries. And the damage that's been done to our community by Keymore's, by DuPont before them, the kind of pollution, the smell, 5 days in the last month, I've had a smell at my house right near the Independence Mall that is overpowering when you walk out in the morning, and they think it's from Fortune, but it's a chemical thing that makes you want to cry. Those kinds of things in water that we can't drink, it makes us unappealing to people that are thinking about moving their companies here and good, clean companies. What are we going to do to enforce the things we already have? We have a wonderful long-range plan for the city and for the county. And yet, go down to River Lights and every tree is gone. And here's this plan that says, we value trees. But we don't enforce it. And we don't, it's cheaper for the developer to pay the fine for cutting the tree than it is to not cut the tree. So somehow we have to have more than words about the things that we want. We have to have enforcement. And that's the piece that I feel very frustrated as a citizen about in all these economic projections, because nobody's going to want to live in a town where you can't drink the water and you can't breathe the air.
You know, that goes back to a vision. I had the opportunity to tour the BMW facility in Greenville, and that was a green facility. Almost 100% of what they bring in is reused somehow. It was the cleanest building I've ever been in, but they had a system in place to utilize everything that was written, almost zero waste in that facility.
And they were told when they came, I understand, they had to do that. They were not invited to come in and be dirty. They were invited to come in and be clean.
And it was great to see that in action.
Right.
And for me, I don't know that I've walked into a building before where I actually saw zero waste until I walked into their building. You know, most of the companies that we recruit here, I would call them clean jobs or clean industry. So I'm not really using that term. When you look at your PPDs and your castle branches, I mean, that's exactly what they are. I mean, they're building buildings, although you got cars driving to those facilities, there are no smokestacks in those facilities, and they're high-tech industries. Same thing with our marine biology field that's pretty much growing in our community as well, whether it be aerospace and GE. You know, to me, again, some of those are what I would call very clean jobs, in that you're not burning fossil fuels, but at the same time you're employing people. And there's a balance there between having a strong workforce and the industry that you bring in. But I think, again, that goes back to what your vision is for your community and what you really want to bring into your community as well. I know we have a relatively low unemployment rate here, but it can always be lower. It was great to see Cape Community College, which I serve with the Board of Trustees, all of a sudden, with the advent of hurricanes coming in, start a lineman program, a line woman program, and train folks to work on utility lines. And with the first class that graduated, there were employers right across the hall, and every person that was in that class got a job. And then they had the second cohort, and the same phenomenon happened, except they had one additional person, because one person that was in the first cohort came back to see if he could get a better paying job. And with our C-Tech, which is our high school, that's a vocational technical high school, preparing young boys and girls who may not want to go to college, with the ability to graduate with certificates in whatever field they're studying in high school, to where they can actually go into the workforce and get a job. Again, seeing GE advertising for machinists. If you see GE advertising on billboards for machinists, that lets you know there's a shortage of machinists in your community.
Right.
And they're trying to figure out how to get that workforce in. And when you have that shortage, again, you might not be able to attract the companies that you want because they're looking for that skilled workforce as they come into your community. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, yes, sir.
Yes, I just want to build on the point of focus. I had a little bit of experience in economic development. The two kind of approaches to it, one is like a shotgun approach, where you answer RFPs, and whoever you feel like you can attract, you know, it's a reactive strategy. What you were outlining was more of a lead strategy where you create a focus that gives you that competitive advantage. So my question to you really is, what, in your opinion, should the focus be? You said there are a lot of possibilities, but the county, what is their focus right now?
So we commissioned the Garment Report some years ago. And the last name Garment was called the Garment Report. I wish it would be called the Barfield Report, but I didn't think of it at the time. And we actually zeroed in on several clusters that should be a part of what we're looking for. One of those is really the farming industry. You know, how do we recruit more companies like the PPD to come here and do farmer research in our community? You know, how how do we tap into the biotech field? People who-
So what's your competitive advantage in those two clusters?
So you got CPD here, you now have Alchemy here, and a few other CROs here as well. Once you create that cluster of folks in that field, almost like RTP, now you've got the human capital there where they can kind of bounce from here to there, and you start to create more of those kind of people coming into your community. Almost like the film industry.
Right.
Exactly like the film industry. We had so many folks that had different skill sets across the board in the film industry. So by bringing those folks in, we can grow that even more. Maybe we'll be called the RTP of the East Coast. And I think that was one of our goals, with the government report, to bring more of those type of jobs to our community.
What were the other clusters?
Aviation was one, growing the aviation cluster, whether it be folks that are making parts and stuff that's geared towards aviation. Drawing a blank on the others, but most of those were green type jobs as well.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I think this is a group of varied opinions with some similar trends. If you were in or leading an economic development organization that was focused on sustainable long-term growth in the Cape Fear region with your knowledge and your expertise, what would you say the plan should be for March of 2019, for 2019, for 2025? What are the action items that folks who are not CEOs and who are not state senators, what would the plan be for people who are concerned citizens who moved here or grew up here and love it and want to stay here? What are the action items that we can do to ensure that we see our green trees and we see our affordable housing and we see those commonalities that we want?
To me, I think tonight is a great action item. Having this conversation, it's really put fire in my belly to convene the right people to start the conversation, to really talk about visioning. I know the chamber is planning on having an after-action meeting from our trip to Greenville to talk about key takeaways. Maybe a group like that may help spearhead the conversation, bring everyone together. It may be that your local government's doing that, and it may take us doing that to bring those people together that may not want to come together, but to have the conversation with the community in the room as well, chiming in about direction, and then from that point, having some subcommittees that can focus on this sector, this sector, this sector, this thing, and then coming back together with reports on what we've all uncovered and found out. Looking at, again, best practices from other cities as well in terms of what they've done to increase whatever job cluster or tourism or whatever industry that they're trying to increase as well. But I think that to me, this is a great starting point, is having this conversation and recognizing the need for, and I think the chamber, again, coming back from the Greenville trip, it was a different group of folks who were on that trip that was on the Richmond trip, that was on the Charleston trip. But again, they kept pounding in the word intentional. And everything that you do, it has to be intentional if you really want to see success happen. And being intentional means that you don't let up. You don't change your focus. You stay with the course until you accomplish your goals.
Jonathan, what you mentioned reminds me a lot of what Woody White did leading up to and preparing for the Gardner Report in getting different groups together around the table. I mean, there were stakeholder group meetings after meetings, and it was very community oriented, but also kind of cut across all the political barriers and got people around the table. I was sitting at a table with Woody and with Mike Giles from Coastal Federation and, Scott Satterfield, and that was a unique opportunity for people to have a conversation, try to find common ground. So things like that, I think, just like you're saying, getting people together, but it happened because Woody spearheaded it. And if he asked, and same I think would be true of you, if you asked, I think the groups would come together.
I think one of the things we need to consider, Jonathan, is are we integrating the transportation needs of our community 20 years down the road? Because right now we're gearing Wilmington to still being 4 rubber tires on the road. And that's becoming an antiquated, outdated, inefficient, and expensive form of transportation for getting around. So if we have better public transit and more inviting public transit, and as part of our plan, that allows people to have a reduced expense for work transit, and that's money that could go toward affordable housing if you don't need to have 2 cars in your family just to get to work. So I think we need to be working with Laura, Transportation 2045, whatever that plan is, and looking at density and make ways of clustering homes so that there can be transit improvement. Automatic driving cars are coming down the road. That could create more chaos because people want to get out of their cars and get back home.
Car go home. I tell you, I've been on the Waves Board for 10 plus years now. And I don't know that our public transportation system will ever get any better than what it is. And the reason I say that, it's going to take a tremendous infusion of cash, real money, to get it to where it is in Charlotte, Raleigh, and Atlanta, where you have 20-minute headways where a bus comes every 20 minutes. You know, most of the waves and headways are only out. So every hour a bus is going to come and this particular stop and pick you up from point A to point B, which means that you have not choice riders, but folks that have to ride the bus that are typically taking that form of transportation. I would tell you that Mike Kozlowski with the Wilmington NPO gave a great presentation to the past presidents of the realtor organization yesterday on this, all of the transportation projects that are taking place, right down to having an overpass all the way along the MLK Parkway so that you won't have to stop at lights anymore. And I was asking the question, why didn't that happen before? I guess back then when they built the MLK Parkway, citizens were complaining they didn't want an overpass because they didn't want their land taken up. But now we realize we need to have overpasses in those places to make traffic flow a whole lot better. How they're looking at changing the Market Street corridor to do away with some of the left turns and make traffic flow a lot more fluidly in our community as well. So I think from that standpoint, vehicular traffic is definitely going to be the main mode of transportation here. We're wanting to reconnect the rail line between Castlehane and Wallace to eventually bring more commercial rail to our community and maybe eventually commuter rail as well. I do not see us getting light rail here. My daughter, my youngest girl at UNC Charlotte, right at the base of her campus across from her dorm was the light rail line where she could actually walk from her dorm or walk across the street and get on the thing and take it uptown, and that's part of our tuition because they're paying for that with their tuition. I don't see that happening in Wilmington. I know that Durham is looking at spending billions of dollars to bring us a light rail there, but I don't see the state DOT spending those kind of resources here. However, if they realize that this rail realignment happens, I think that's going to open up a corridor to have a trolley system that may be able to run the length of some of those areas to get people back and forth, or bike lanes or some of those kind of things as well. It should be able to be repurposed. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to, this is a particular question for you, but maybe just more of a statement or point of discussion.
We're not doing statements tonight, Claire.
Carlton might have to talk again. But in speaking on like the creative ways of solving these issues when we don't have the cash inflow to maybe address something that large, I know that our company did something earlier or in the summer last year where it was this massive ride sharing effort. And so it was like, I think it might have been at the county initiative level, I can't remember.
So that's spearheaded by the NPO.
Yeah, My Open Road was something, I can't remember the name of it, but they were trying to be really creative with this app and getting people to kind of like feed into this consumer to consumer economy, but it wasn't expensive. It was, it was real money saver, and it was incentivized by our company to address something like that. And I think if we have some more maybe transparency and cool initiatives like that between larger companies, that could be something too we could address. And I know that transportation issue, when we had that end of the year thing, came up a lot. Like people were heated about that topic. So maybe that can be something else to explore.
We're trying to develop more parking rides here with the ride share. So the NPO works with the biggest employers, the hospital, the university here, live to PPDs and those companies as well, trying to get folks to ride share to reduce the number of vehicles that are on the road. and doing some of the same thing over in Brunswick County as well, and trying to get folks to park and then ride a van to a certain destination. It's catching on with some folks. You know, when you go to your DCs and places like that, that's pretty much what you do. But try to weave that into the mindset here. You know, WAVE is trying to figure out how they get a permanent funding source. They have really no funding source outside the federal dollars coming down, some state and some county dollars coming down as well, and some state funds coming from the feds basically. They get their budget work, and they floated out the idea of the county passing a $7 vehicle registration fee that would give them some sustainable funding. But it would take, I mean, an average bus is going to cost about $400 grand, or just over $400,000. So you multiply that times how many buses you would need to create a shorter headway, and then the amount of human capital it would take to drive those buses, they just don't have the resources here. And having grown up in Wilmington, you know, public transportation has always been thought of as what the poor people rode to work. But when you go to Columbus, Ohio, it's what your business professionals get around on. And really trying to change public perception has been a challenge for WAVE for a long time, because public transportation is something that everyone should use. You know, and I'm glad that our universities were teaching young people to get on public transportation. At UNCW, we have the WAVE shuttle, the Seahawk shuttle that actually gets those kids around. My daughter went to Chapel Hill. I mean, she grew up riding the bus at Chapel Hill. My girl at UNC Charlotte, the same phenomenon out there as well. So trying to change the mindset of some of the younger folks to utilize public transportation. But then when you come to Wilmington, it comes on the hour and doesn't really work for a lot of people. One more?
Just take one more question?
Who's it going to be?
I have a question, observation, that rolls back to conversation from 30 minutes. But you're talking about issues of affordable housing, the weakness of zoning controls. I understand North Carolina doesn't have an inclusionary zoning. How do other communities, Asheville in particular is one that I'm familiar with, that has had a real strength as an affordable housing program. This negotiates regularly with developers to say, you're not going to get approval to do what you're proposing to do until you agree to include a specific component of workforce affordable housing, and is able to enforce that. What's the mechanism that they're using, which is under North Carolina law? If you look at South Carolina or you look at Massachusetts or something like that, no. I mean, Massachusetts is kind of a leader in this inclusionary zoning issue. North Carolina doesn't have it, then you have to work with what you've got. What's Asheville doing?
I don't know, but I'm going to find out. The reason I say that, our former deputy county manager,
Yes.
Harold Pender, is just taking the job as county manager there. And, you know, in our conversation, she said, Jonathan, they're doing things in Asheville that we're talking about here. They hired Paul D'Angelo, who worked at Tribute Properties here, to go and actually spearhead their affordable housing initiatives up in Buncombe County in Asheville. And so they really put money and brought money to the table to address the issue.
With that bond issue in 2016.
And so I'm looking forward to it. And I share with her, I'm going to reach out to her and just find out exactly what they are doing there. Once she gets ingrained, we figure out how can we incorporate some of their techniques in southeast North Carolina to indeed grow our affordable housing stock. We are the second smallest county in North Carolina land-wise, and the third most densely populated. And we really don't have that much more vacant land available. And there are a couple families that probably control the majority of that vacant land, and they're not selling a whole lot of it.
But that's a challenge in itself, what you just said, and it points to the need for there being some kind of integrated action across the three principal counties, New Hanover, Brunswick, and Pender. Because New Hanover is not going to be able to do a lot of what you're talking about by itself, and the metropolitan area very quickly is across the river.
I was driving through Brunswick County yesterday, and I was amazed at all the new developments that I saw that had popped up there. But even in our county, you know, the Carolina Beach last weekend, and there's a lot of new things that popped up on the island as well. And even in the unincorporated parts of our county, there's a lot of development that is taking place. But we, as you said, Greenville County can't be the housing stock for everyone. And so the housing prices in Brunswick and Greenville County are definitely a whole lot less. And even 10 years ago, we had developers building the same house, the same developer building the same house in a neighborhood here in Brunswick County. The house was literally $20,000 less in Brunswick County. Same house, same square footage, same floor plan, same developer, but a 20+ grand difference in cost coming across the river. And I guess land costs are a little bit different as well. I hope I answered your question. I enjoyed hanging out with you all tonight, and hope I gave you some insight into my thoughts on how we make this thing happen, and look for an action plan, because now that we've had the conversation, we're going to figure out how I sit with the manager and how we can meet some folks together to really talk about, and maybe the Garner Report 2.0, and how we, bring this thing back to the table, and broaden it just from the Garner Report, but also look at other aspects. Again, we have a great tourism base here. We have over 5,400 folks that are involved in the tourism-related field in terms of employment, plus all those folks that come here staying in our hotels and eating in our restaurants. And so I like to honk my horn when people are driving slow, but I've learned how to not honk my horn anymore, because you don't know who's visiting and you want your welcome to
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you all so much for coming out tonight, and we're very thankful to WHQR for hosting us, especially during their pledge drive. So we'll go ahead and make the pitch. If you have not contributed, wait until Saturday night, because Saturday night from 6 to 10, your CFEDC is going to be collecting the pledges and answering those calls, and keep us entertained. So, please make sure to call in and support our wonderful local radio station, and we certainly appreciate you all coming out. Please sign the sign-in. You can either do it on the iPad or you can physically sign in. Even if you come all the time, just write your name down. We just like to keep a finger on the pulse of who's coming to these things and who's interested.
And thank you so much. We would really like, if there's anything at CFEDC, if there's anything, as you're looking forward, you said that you're going to go back and look at what you can do and what you can do with the New Hanover County. If there's anything that CFEDC can do to play a role, call on us, call on Ann, just call on us, because we want to be active participants.
Gotcha.
And we really do, we want to be active participants in this, in looking at where do we bring in people, how do we do this, how do we formulate a plan? And we have a lot of good people on our board that know how to formulate plans, so.
I don't think my kind of imagine is going to get any rest in the next short while.